All right, guys, we are back with another episode. I am here with Gary Wayne, the author of A Genesis 6 Conspiracy 1 and 2, a book about the origin and existence of the Nephilim and the impact they have on biblical prophecy. So go ahead, Gary, tell me what inspired you to write this book.
Yeah, it's a bit of a journey for sure. I don't think somebody sort of wakes up one morning and says, I want to write a conspiracy book and I want to write it about giants and everything that happened both before and after the flood. And that certainly wasn't my case. So it kind of crept into I guess, my vision in terms of my line of sight after I had started a quest to verify a book I was challenged to read, which was a prophetic book. And it was like in 1980 or 81 when the challenge was. And it was by a fellow named Hal Lindsey, who was way ahead of his time in biblical prophecy and talking about end time prophecy. And it scared the socks off of me. So I wanted to verify whether or not he was being accurate or not. So it's easy to look up the verses, but things can be out of context and things can be manipulated from scriptures. So the only way that if I thought there was something to it and I thought he was onto something was to start to dig into the Bible, which I was a little bit familiar with when I was young, but I was not, a Christian at that point in time. And, I was pretty much firmly in the secular and evolutionary camps and things like that. So I started to read the Bible, and I had to quickly put the KJV one aside and get one that I could understand in modern English because my mind was going to mush with it. So I decided I'd read it, and I read it through a couple of times, and I thought, well, there's so much information in there, and the only way I can really dial in on this is I have to start to file things in prophecy narratives. And so, you start with highlights, you realize you don't have enough colors. So then I have to come up with a new system. And so I started to put things into files, just handwriting it down, putting it into files. And of course, I had to do more files than I thought. And all the way through in each of these different processes over about 15 years is that you get into Genesis 6 and you see this thing about giants. And I hit this sort of cognizant dissonance where I want nothing to do with that. Whatever that is, it's making my head explode, and that's not what I'm here for. The problem is it just kept coming up. So throughout the research process of logging all the prophecy narratives, I thought I'd log everything that there was in the Bible that I thought was there about giants and demons and angels and the rebellion and stuff like that. And I put that into a separate file. And then when I thought I had enough information on the research, I started to put things into binders in terms of prophecy narratives, not as necessary story, but just linking verses and just for my own sort of head getting around so much information. And when I had that done, I realized, I have a lot of books I could probably write, but, I'm not university educated. I didn't go to seminary school. I wasn't on social media. I had no platform and not a recognized expertise in anything of any sort of form. And so that's a fairly big challenge to talk on a topic where you don't have a platform. But I thought I'm going to take an easy topic and I'm going to write a small book and just a short one, see whether I can get published, whether or not I can even write a book, and whether or not anybody might read it or buy it. So I decided to link Genesis 6 with the creation of the giants to end time prophecy, where we have all of these mighty men and these great wars, and you have the fallen angels and you have these demons, and just sort of connect it to and make sort of a curiosity sort of story and see how that looks. And so I wrote that in about, you know, fairly quickly in about 10 chapters. But when I was young, I had a obsession with history and mythology. So I thought, what I've learned, what's in the Bible really talks about what other cultures talk about. And so I put in things about the Greek mythology, Sumerian mythology. And then I realized you needed some context for particularly Christians who may not be familiar and always sort of dismiss things. And just as the seculars just sort of dismiss things. And that involves understanding their religion. And so I had to read about the different religions and not just, the Greek religions. And there's several different types of Greek religions, including Gnosticism and many others, and the old ancient polytheist religions and the Indo-Aryan religions. But you also have the Vedas, you have, the Popol Vuh, you have all the Gnostic scriptures, and on and on and on of all the different sort of cultures. So I started to read all of that. And then I sort of realized that this whole understanding of giants, the mystical religions, were part of a hierarchy, and that this hierarchy and culture were wedded together, and the education system was wedded together, and that out of the religion that they created for the knowledge of what they had put together themselves with the seven sciences and the knowledge from the gods or the fallen angels, they created a mystical religion to keep that information and develop it, and to keep it from people that they would call mundane. And so out of that comes the mystery schools, where the whole upper class, the first two classes of every system around the world, European, it was known as the feudal system, but it's a four-class system where you have this larger nobility elite that runs the religious class, the warrior class, in terms of the generals and things like that, the governing class of the kings and any sort of government, and also the education class, and they only educated themselves. And out of that came the beginning of the secret societies. And I didn't know anything about secret societies. So then I had to dig into secret societies. And that took me down the rabbit hole for about 10 years. And so by about, I started to write the book in about 1996. And by about 2013, I thought I had something ready to publish. So, and it was
Wow. So it was more than 10 years in the making?
Yeah, you could also say 30 years in the making when you involved all the research, but the writing aspect was at least 15 years. And then it was a couple more years before I got published, where I continued to work on the book. So yeah, that's sort of how I got there, but it turned into like 98 chapters and 800 pages. And I took 350 pages out because I needed it to be at a size where somebody might want to read it all, instead of just starting it saying, well, this is just too much information. So not that 800 pages is a small book. And I was, again, unknown, no platform, so high risk. And the book is large, high cost. That's a bad intersection.
Yeah.
But I found a way. So, and now I've done book two.
So what inspired you to kind of look into the Nephilim specifically? Like, how did you figure out their origins, who they are, what they look like? Because there's an argument that the giants or the Nephilim that's talked about in Genesis are just sinful, bad, strong-looking people.
Yeah, so as you're starting to get into it, it's such a strong argument that they may have been a little bit taller because they're warriors, but they're just part of that class, right? Trouble is that when you look at the definition of giant as it shows up in the KJV, it doesn't just say they're just a little bit larger. It calls them giants, right? And giants, as we understand that in the English dictionary, is something significantly larger amongst of the species that it's akin to. And so this is something more. And it was a tribe of giants. And these ones were the mighty ones, or the Gibberim, mighty, powerful warriors. And
Men of renown.
yeah, men of renown, which is, comes from the Hebrew word Shem and Shemaim. And Shem is the sort of famous or infamy part of the meaning, and Shemaim is the heavenly ones or the heavens. So, and understood as a being, if they're from the heavenly ones, the sons of God, they would be from the Nephilim of the Shemaim, and that these were Nephilim are fallen ones, as you put the I am male plural on it, and that's the fallen angels. And so somehow you have these spiritual beings that took a physical form to procreate with human females to create a new race that was significantly larger. So then I thought, well, if they could take a physical body and they were sort of representing what their imagery might be represented in another dimension, but in a physical form, so that they could have a dwelling place for their spirit to pass on the DNA, then that would pass on gifts. So it would be not only looks, but also what
Strength,
other powers they might have, right? And the immortality that came with the counterfeit spirit, as known as demigods. And demigods, I already knew from Greek history is defined in the ancient manner as the offspring of a god and a human female, or a goddess and a male. So that lined up perfectly, and you get the same accounts in the Sumerian. So then I thought, well, what did these angels look like? And who are the watchers? So you start to peel it back. And so there's the main ones that were the watchers, and there's four groups. There's archangels, there's cherubim, which have four faces. There's Ophanim, which we do get in the Bible, but you have to take that back to Hebrew and Ezekiel 1, 3, and 10. They're the Ophanim, the wheel cherubim like to have four faces. One of the faces is cherubim. And so something distinct about them within the wheels. And you also have the seraphim, and the seraphim and the archangels are, fairly well known. And, from a biblical as the cherubim, the Ophanim less so, because it's not defined or translated to provide the name for us in English, but it is there in Hebrew. But the seraphim were serpent-faced, six-winged dragons of heaven that worked before the altar. So then I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Because my understanding of mythology has most of these gods, or a large percentage of them, being serpentine or dragon creator gods, or feathered serpents or plumed serpents. And it doesn't matter where you go in the world, it's this worldwide legacy. And the kings were depicted as their offspring, divine representatives of the earth, and they were described as serpents as well.
Yeah, like the dragon kings in ancient China, and then you have the Nagas in India. Just this variety of serpent-like beings.
So book one is looking at these different organizations and how they work together to investigate what I was calling, back from very early on, the House of Dragon, which is quite popular in imagery today for obvious reasons, because they put their history and genealogies out there in plain sight. You just have to understand they're not writing fiction. They may be writing fiction, but it's based on their history, genealogies, and religion and gods. So it all starts to make sense when you start to understand that. So then I thought, well, okay, so they have these sort of reliefs, but do we have anything that we can actually attach them to what this looked like? And so I thought, well, if all of the kings were these bloodline giants, then we ought to see something in a statue that's a little bit more serpentine. So the one that I found was interesting, and it led me into more research, which is part of the second book that I didn't put in the first book because it's big as it is Akhenaten. And I spent a lot of time with Akhenaten in the last half of book one, and he has statues. He's part of the Amarna dynasty, and he is venerated in science. He's venerated in occult history. Like, he's an important figure because they make him so public, along with his son, King Tut. And so I thought I'd go see a King Tut museum and see what they had in there. And I know there's serpentine imagery all throughout the Egyptian religion, including that cobra sort of look with the headdress, right? And the serpents all throughout the royal imagery. But then I looked at the statue of Akhenaten, and he is over 1,000 years after the flood. So he has this face that looks like a serpent, has this long protruding chin, these very high cheekbones, these large wraparound eyes, and understanding that the giants were the shining ones, and their eyes would light up, and they would light up a room, that voices that would bellow and basically shake things in a room. They could make it so loud. And he had this elongated skull that was supersized. I mean, you can wrap heads and when they're babies and make them elongated, but you can't do two things. One is increase the capacity size of it, which is way bigger than a human. You just physically can't create more volume, and you can't take away the sutures. And of course, the elongated skulls have both that are attributed to the ancient giants that are found in archaeology and shoved away into what they call oop parts for these misaligned pieces of evidence that doesn't fit the standard sort of chronology for secular science. So yeah, so all of a sudden I'm into, okay, so I have this race of serpentine beings, and you have these seraphim angels, and you have Satan, the great god
Again.
of the fallen angels, who's a dragon and a serpent. Then I'm going, I have to dig more into what all of this means.
Mhm. What's interesting is if the serpent in the garden could have been a dragon, then his punishment makes sense as to why God said, "You shall crawl on your belly all the days of your life." If he's a
Yeah,
dragon, it means he could fly.
yeah, I would make a distinction there that that would not be a angelic being. And I would make that distinction this way: is that in Ezekiel 28, from a Christian perspective, is Satan is in his cherubic form in that passage when he said that he was in Eden, as opposed to his seraphic form
Mhm.
that we know him for in Revelation 12. And so Satan is a unique angel, greater than all the other ones. And I cover this off in book 2 to give more detail onto some of the things I alluded to in book 1, is he has many titles and many names. So Halel is the Hebrew word for Lucifer in Isaiah 14. It should be translated, I think, as Halel, as Michael is translated, or Gabriel, or Azazel, or as Azazel is known in the book of Enoch, which have that El as part of the name of an angelic being, and
It's
Satan
of God,
is
right?
the greatest status. Lucifer is an Italian word
Mhm.
inserted for a Hebrew word into the English language, which makes no sense other than when you start to understand that Lucifer is the god of the Freemasons and the Gnostics and the great architect. It starts to make some sense why they did that, but that's a whole different rabbit hole. And so in the book of Enoch, his name is Gadrael. That's in Eden. So we know he's in Eden. He's just not in a seraphic form
Mhm.
from a biblical perspective. And the Nahash, which is the Hebrew word for serpent, um, actually is as what it says, but it's at a time before it has been punished when it's going to deceive Eve. So it's the one that becomes punished. It loses its legs, its speech, its intelligence, and its wings. And I think there's probably a large variety of the beast of the field that you can make an argument for created in day 5 as you look at great whales and look at Tanum and take that back, that includes serpent, or from the beasts of the field as it's described in Genesis 3, which is before the creation of humankind in day 6. And so this is a separate being that I think is either coached, and ours has already gone astray. And because when you take the source word back from the hash, you come up with a Hebrew word that's going to mean enchanter, necromancer, sort of sorcerer, right? So it's part of the occult priestess class of worshiping the pantheon of gods. And this is the one that has either been coached by Satan, who's in Eden, or he is an avatara of the avatar Satan, who gives the Nahash the additional knowledge to go through with the deception of Adam and Eve, no matter the consequences. And biblically, we know this can happen, so it matches up with the avatar. And where I found the distinction of an avatara and avatar was actually in Strong's old Cyclopedia. And it had both. I'm going, well, what's the difference? Well, one is the angelic being and one is the human host. And so it's different than possession because it's an angelic being. And so
Flesh.
in the Bible, Satan enters into Judas to give him the courage to go through with um, turning Jesus in and betraying him and taking the consequences as the sort of an allegorical son of perdition, as what Antichrist is going to be called in the end time. So we know biblically that that can happen. And in the occult, Buddha is an avatar of Vishnu. And Narashima, that Aslan in the Narnia tales is based on, is an avatar of Shiva, the destroyer god that would be cognate to Abaddon and Apollyon in Revelation 9. So, yeah, I think that's what's happened there is that Satan and the fallen angels, what they don't do is get blood on their own hands.
Mhm.
They created beings or lead beings away to do their dirty work. So in this case, the Nahash who takes the punishment, not Satan, because Satan's not punished for that. He doesn't go to the pit prison. He doesn't lose his arms and legs and things like that. And same with the Nephilim that are created by the Watchers in Genesis 6. And a lot of Christians will say, well, Watchers is, you get that out of the book of Enoch. That's not in the Bible. Well, not quite. It is. In Daniel 4, it says Watchers 4 times, and it's the Hebrew word Air, which has a close relationship with the devil gods, which are Sa'ir or Satyrs, and that means hairy goat god. And that's the degraded seraphim Watchers. In their format as the ones that didn't go to the flood or to the prison immediately, they appear as degraded Watchers, just like Satan has been degraded to Satan status. And these are the devil goat gods like the Pan God or Bacchus or Baphomet, or all the ones, Cernunnos, all of these goat gods that come down through history and only are there for a short time, because even those gods, and they're associated with immoral sexual behavior of the goat gods, all the ones who violate the sins after the flood go to the pit prison as well. So we know, for example, like you have, let's say, Greek mythology that people might be familiar with. You have Kronos and Gaia, they're parent gods of the antediluvian epoch, and they create giants. And so they disappear some way in polytheism, and the offspring gods like Zeus take over for them. Parent gods ruled before the flood, which helps in chronology for people, and the offspring gods like Zeus or Osiris or Baal, son of El, or Enki, Enlil, son of Anu, they're offspring gods who overthrow in polytheism and slay immortal gods, which is not possible because they're immortal. They went to the pit prison. They take over and rule, and then they create new giants after the flood as well. Giants may also survive. There's more than one possibility for how they show up, but we get a lot of accounts in Greek, Sumerian, biblical, and Semitic sources, and all around the world where there is a second incursion. And if they did that, they would also go to the pit prison, and these gods disappear shortly after creating those types of giants. So in polytheism, you have, for example, Zeus creating Hercules. That's after the flood. And that starts to help people with that chronology. Or Theseus is created by Zeus, or Perseus, and again, after the flood. So you have another one named Gilgamesh, and there was probably one before the flood, as the book of Enoch talks about as well, Book of Giants. But Gilgamesh is born 6th generation after the flood. Excuse me. He is the son of Lugobanda and the female goddess Nin, and he becomes the king of Uruk. So he's clearly the second incursion creation of giant, and he's 19 feet tall and 7 feet wide, with his dimensions described not only in Sumerian, Akkadian, other Mesopotamian records, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, and in the Ugaritic text that also has a version of the same stories, which is, another culture that's quite a distance away. And it's about Hercules. So we know the details are accurate, because at least they're accurate within those texts. And so in the Epic of Gilgamesh, you also have the flood story, the Sumerian flood story, and all of those giants are demigods as well, 2/3 god, 1/3 human, as is Enkidu and Gilgamesh. And Gilgamesh searches Utnapishtim out to gain his wisdom. So again, it shows both a second incursion of giants, and you get a survival of giants on another ark. So a lot of the ark stories in polytheism, they are giant survival stories as opposed to the human survival story. Same event, probably a parallel account.
And their ark, it also looked different. I believe in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the ark was more square than the one in the Bible, which was more rectangular almost, I believe.
Yep. Yeah, so similar. And however giants show up after the flood, they're helped by angels somehow, some way, to be able to do that, either in survival, in an ark, in the earth, off the earth in another dimension. However it happens, there's fallen angelic support to make that happen. And one of the interesting things that I cover off in the new book are the post-Diluvian giants in the Bible called the Rephaim. And again, this word shows up 25 times in Hebrew versus 3 times for Nephilim. So it's the most common ones, and they're distinct. And in the Ugaritic text, which is written in Semitic language that Hebrew comes from, and Ugarit is between the city of Tyre and Mount Hermon, sort of right in the middle in the northern part of the covenant land.
Yeah.
You have this dynastic realm of the assembly of the Dat Tanu, which in the first book I cover off as the Tuatha De Dan, and I introduced the Ugaritic text in the second book, and that's the same people as the Tuatha De Dan, just a transliteration, the Datanu. And they're in the assembly of the Datanu, reporting to the assembly of the gods of Baal that El was the first leader of the gods before the flood on Mount Hermon.
Mm-hmm.
And after the flood, you have the Rephaim remnant that is doing rituals to bring Baal and Ashtaroth back to create more giants. And they're doing fertility rituals to do that. So that says A, they're gone.
Yeah.
And B, they don't come back, which causes the Rephaim a significant problem, and that those fallen angels that committed the same crimes as the angels before the flood, they went to the pit prison as well. And they're wanting more Rephaim to be created because, as I said, they're a little bit distinct. They're going to be a little bit smaller, less powers, but also a fertility issue. There's a word in Ezekiel 32 that's called the terrible ones.
Yeah.
And that's Erit. And it has these descriptions that you'd apply to a giant, but also a fertility issue and childless. And so one of the things that we also match up with giants after the flood is there's very few females. And before the flood, the Nephilim procreated in great numbers and not seemingly any sort of female issues in terms of the numbers for that procreation. But after the flood, they have a limited amount of females. And so that's a very key word in our understandings, because these are the ones in Ezekiel 32 that are talking to Pharaoh, a bloodline Rephaim, along with the mighty El. And the terrible ones are those ones who did horrible things on the earth and were slain and went to the pit prison. So this would include Nephilim, and as well as Rephaim. Not all of the disembodied spirits of the giants go to the flood, or to the pit prison. Just the worst of them do, and probably the ones who lose their head. And Erit is one of the core syllables in Ugaritic, and Ug will take that back to Hebrew as being Og. So Ugaritic was the city of Og. You would say that in Hebrew, Kirath Ugarit, and Ug is the terrible one. Like he's a horrible giant. And he's and after the war of giants in Genesis 14, he actually goes back there as well as the remnant of the giants of the first generation after the flood. And he's going to rule over the Amorites from Ashtaroth and Edrei, the cities that are mentioned in the Ugaritic text. So
the pit is like this dimension or prison for the spirits of these Nephilim and the angels?
Yes. So we know it as the abyss prison. So Revelation 9, that is open just before the midpoint of the last 7 years, those are coming back out in the end time. All of the worst of the angels. Not all the demons are there. Not all of the fallen angels are there. Only those ones who broke certain laws that they weren't permitted to do in the physical world. So
that place,
yes.
also known as is it also known as the dry places that's mentioned in the book of Luke, when it talks about spirits coming out of a man going to the dry places?
Yeah. No, not quite. So the pit prison is in Sheol and in Hades. And it is in a specific location there. It's not the lake of fire. That's another location. It's unfortunate that Sheol and Hades, or the other world, Anwim, Argatha, has got 1,000 different names for it. And you've got the pit prison that's located in a location there, but it's a separate location within Hades, and then you have the lake of fire, and that's been conflated into hell, and makes it difficult sometimes for people to sort of sift through that in that poor poor part of the translations that we
Yeah.
get into English. So the dry places are not talking about the spirits that are in the pit prison. It's talking about the ones that um, are wandering the earth and didn't make it to the other possible location would be in Sheol and in Hades, but not in the pit prison. And in the rituals of the occult, that's where they're trying to get to be with their gods, where they rule from. That's their heaven. Whether or not that part actually is true or not, or they still end up wandering if they're not in the pit prison, I'll leave that up for the occultists to decide. But the ones that Jesus is describing, he is describing the evil, the unclean spirits, and the devils. And we need to understand that the word devil isn't diabolos. That is the Greek word described for Satan in the New Testament. It's daemon, which is making a distinction between, fallen angels as in diablos, or part of the Satans, as the book of Enoch lists his lieutenants, so to speak, as, and with these disembodied spirits, which are unclean, and they are evil, and they are devils, and they're used interchangeably. I have a document on people. If they want to get a hold of me, I'll walk through that biblically for them. And these are the ones that they need a place of rest because they're like in dry places. So they can't rest, and they're like thirsting to have interaction in the world. And so the only way they can do that is possess a human. They need an oiketerion again, as the angels created. And if people wonder where I get that term from, it's a Greek word, and it's the Greek word for habitation in Jude 1:6 when it's talking about the fallen angels when they left their habitation. And it means a dwelling place for the spirit. And 2 Corinthians 5:10, the house in heaven, also says oiketerion. There's other variations of oiketerion, but not the exact same word, meaning similar things. But this specifically means a dwelling place for the spirit. So in the New Testament, we're told we have a soul and a body, which is of this world, and the spirit that comes from heaven. And so the spirit from heaven requires an oiketerion, a soul and a body to merge with, to interact physically, including humans. That gives us our ability for a resurrection down the road. And so this is the oiketerion that is being created. And so the only way that demons can now interact physically in the world once their bodies died, which was limited to 120 years in Genesis 6:3 within the creation of giant stories and the preamble before the flood as context for the flood, is to possess a body or possess an oiketerion. And so it has to suppress a host.
So we were talking about the pit and the dry places being a type of dimension, a prison for these spirits and angels. Do you think the experience people have on psychedelics like DMT, where they go to another world, is this the same place?
Yeah, I think so. They're talking about multiple universes, the metaverse. I think metaverse is one of those occultic sort of terms that comes from Third Enoch, Metatron, who is transformed into a god-like being, like the old wisdom of God, of knowledge in Egypt, Thoth, Enoch. And Metatron is the one that's also linked in with computer technology. And so once you start linking in that with the angelic technology that was active before the flood, that we're just catching up to, and that we know in the occult they go into at least the dimension where Hades and Sheol is located, is that there's a multiple dimension physical universe is a part of that dimension, separate from heaven. Hard to know, but there's at least biblically we know there's three. Mystical religions would say there's seven, but yeah, I would say that they're reflecting that principle of other dimensions. And so we have a lot of occult rituals around the world. The mystical religions have 8 major Sabbaths in a year, aligned with the solstice and the equinox, and then one additional one that comes in between. So there's a season of everything. So the season of Samhain that begins on October 31st and goes right through to November the 11th, is the time where the spirits that are in Hades, not the pit prison, because they're not let out, but the ones there actually come through. And that's what, Halloween is all about. And that's why when you look at Halloween, pretty much all of the uh, costumes that you'll put on is going to reflect something within the Nephilim culture,
That exists.
including ghosts. Yes.
Vampires, demons, ghosts. And what's
Yeah.
interesting about that is it reminds me of shamanistic rituals when they put on costumes and they invoke a
Yeah.
spirit, masks and whatnot.
Yeah, it is. And, even the Day of the Dead, um, which is sort of part of the Samhain, they use that pale white um, makeup to look like these very pale white giants when they were on the earth. And we have these depictions in Southeast Asia of these giants that have these pale white, super terrifying clown-like faces. And so you have court gestures in the royal courts, which was just a place for the priests of occultism to advise the polytheist king of his what he should be doing, and it's hidden in plain sight, which is the typical thing that the occult likes to do. So you have this, I guess, common legacy that comes down through history. And you can also look in and say the same type of legacy is portrayed in the ancient theater. And in theater, you're channeling these characters, which are all descendants of the Nephilim or Rephaim. And so they're wearing these white theater masks. And then the
Mhm.
theater masks that are used in China, they're white in the background, but now they have all of these demonic sort of faces that we would assemble with. And so, yeah, there you have this common understanding where these beings at certain times of the year, they come through. But they also have a link, as you say, in other occult rituals where the shamans, who also paint their faces white, are trying to bring in the spirit to try and control that spirit, because they feel as adepts they've been educated to a level where they have certain words and things that they could control that demonic spirit, and that demonic spirit would do like a inferior form of the avatar effect. So they don't have the power of the fallen angels, but they can provide them wisdom or knowledge and maybe some additional power that sort of goes along with it. I don't know whether that actually happens. I think a demonic spirit just suppresses the host, and then does whatever it wants to do. And maybe they allow that as part of the partnership, that they think that they're getting something out of it. But it is different than the Avatara effect.
Mhm.
And not all possessions work out.
Yeah. Well, there's an example of this in scripture with the spirit of divination that followed Paul into Macedonia, I believe. So
Yeah.
this woman was getting this power from this unclean spirit, basically.
Yes. Yep,
So
exactly. Yeah. And so we're told about these evil spirits in the Old Testament and the New Testament. What we don't, what we aren't provided is, verses that say these are the disembodied spirits of the Rephaim or the Nephilim. You get that in the book of Enoch, but Enoch's not standard um, canon. And I think there was probably an original Hebrew manuscript and a full manuscript for the Book of Enoch, and it would have been nice to have that in there, because I think the copy that we have today, I mean, it runs 99% accurate with the Bible. It's got some corruptions in it, but we only have the fuller versions in Giaz, which is the Ethiopian, and that's the one I would recommend because it has the most passages, Aramaic, Greek, and Slavonic. And so handed down, but we have some fragments of the Book of Enoch, so we know it was probably, whether it's the same size or whatever changes, we can't test all of that for veracity, but we can test it for its consistency with the Bible. And so in there you have words like Ophanim, which we know, as we talked about earlier, is that's the Hebrew word for the wheel angels.
mhm.
So that would have to come from Hebrew, and the original Hebrew, the sons of God term, the giants, the evil spirits. And there it talks about the evil spirits as being the disembodied spirits.
The origins.
And yeah, and in the Bible, we get accounts, and I list them in the new book, but the most classic form is Goliath having his head taken by David. I mean, he kills him with one of the five smooth stones, and he was probably looking to kill the other four giant kings of the other four cities of the five city Pentapolis at the time of the battle. But after he felled him, he went up and he took Goliath's sword and he cut his head off. Well, in the execration texts, the worst death you can have as a royale, as a giant descendant, is to have your head cut off. And that means they're afraid you're going to the pit prison because you're a warrior doing horrible things, or you're going to have to wander the earth, but you're not going to be able to go into Hades or Sheol, where apparently these demons are so happy they come out to terrorize the earth on certain Sabbaths. I mean, it's absolutely a bizarre sort of concept, but yeah, so it's very, very important to understand that these evil spirits, we have a way to take that back scripturally, and then that matches up perfectly with what's in Enoch. And I measure everything that's outside the Bible with what's in the Bible, so it has to be directionally with that. So with that understanding, and that the occult has many rituals to be in contact with these, to create these portals for them to come through. I mean, you can look at yoga as part of the Eastern mysticism, is designed to put you in a position to receive the divine essence. And the divine essence has all of the knowledge in all the universes, and it is part of the Sophia understanding of wisdom, the theology of wisdom, the goddess of wisdom, and that it transmits this knowledge through an invisible particle in the quantum level. So in another dimension, all dimensions, and it merges with a particle you can measure to transmit all knowledge instantaneously. That's what you're trying to do to become in contact with the New Age divine essence, or the Atman or Atma particle that CERN is looking for. But you may not be in contact with that fallen angel. It may be just a portal to let in demons, and that's what happens a lot of times in a lot of these rituals, and they can't get rid of those. They're very hard to get rid of, and they're not likely wanting to be exercised, or they're probably not wanting to become a Christian to invoke the power of Jesus to remove them. So it becomes a problem.
An example of that is the Kundalini psychosis specifically. People who engage in that meditation, it's a common thing to experience psychosis right after, like seeing demonic beings, feeling like you're possessed, and not being in control of your body. It's very interesting looking into that.
Yeah, and something that people need to be aware, whatever your belief system is understand what you believe and why you believe that, and then make your decisions. And so we want to be careful when we're dealing with interdimension and possible spirits. They could be good spirits or they could be evil spirits. So we want to be very, very careful with that. And in that whole sort of concept, there's this crazy clown thing where you have these evil clowns, right? Well, these are in the same ideology as the shamans with those spirits. I mean, there are rituals where this clown would be not understood as a clown, but as a court gesture, or as a priest or a priestess. And they're using the same kind of makeup, and they're trying to bring in this trickster spirit, preferably an avatar, angelic being, but the most likely is that they're receiving the demonic spirit that they can control. So this crazy clown is looking for this trickster spirit to add that extra power and wisdom, and probably some of those get out of control, which is where the evil clown thing comes from, because they're the ones in control and they don't like humanity. They were created to destroy humankind from the face of the earth and ensure we don't receive our destiny, which is to choose God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit and the resurrection. So there's also a connection with when we talked about Halloween and costumes as superheroes. So like Batman, for example, comes from the house of Bat in the Camazots with the Zilbalba demigods out of the Popol Vuh. You've got Superman, El from the house of El, as we talked about, as El being the parent god of the Canaanite pantheon and Baal being the son. And this is Jor-El and Dur-El, the father and son of Superman.
Mhm.
So they're all these superheroes are built on either ancient giants or ancient technology that creates the superpower that they had.
Well, art imitates
And
life, basically.
yeah, so now we connect that back into Batman that we talked about as being a superhero, House of Camazotz. And if you Google Camazotz, you're going to get this outfit that Batman basically wears, and it's a depiction that comes out of reliefs in Central America for the section of the Zabalba, which were owl-faced giants, like the Tengu out of Southeast Asia. But
Mhm.
this is a special one of the House of the Bat. And so in the superhero ideology, you have them as the good ones, the white hats, and then you have the crooks that have superpowers as well through different technology and stuff like that. One has the interest of humankind in the white hats and one that doesn't. Standard dualism within polytheism, where you have good witches and bad witches, white magic, black magic. It's layered all the way through their
Mhm.
literature and their entertainment, as we see with the superhero series. And so within there, you have the Joker. And what does he look like? He
Wow.
looks like a crazy clown. Now, remember what I talked about with the court gesture? Well, if he didn't, the superficial story of the mythos is that if he couldn't make the king laugh, the king would take a knife and slit his mouth from face to face. This make-up clown-looking gesture. What really happened is if he couldn't foretell and help him succeed as his loyal advisor and priest, he would slit his mouth open to saying, "You have failed." So now that's the exact look that we get in as the Joker in Batman. And so now you can imagine all of them as being Nephilim, Rephaim derived and demonic spirits that are providing these modern stories with their superpowers.
So it's them glorifying themselves in today's day and age,
It
basically.
is.
It
Yeah,
is.
they want to keep their history, their genealogy, their belief system, and their um, gods alive. And we swim in an ocean of that because they've controlled society through the top two classes all throughout history, including the entertainment. I mean, and so yeah, they're just trying to keep that alive and to prepare us. They've always been trying to bring about the end time. They just can't bring it about the way they want. That's what the beast empires were designed to do
Mhm.
after the flood. And that there's an old message that we get out of the Old Testament in Ecclesiastics, verse chapter 1, where it talks about nothing is new under the sun, and what was will be again. So just
Mhm.
as what happened before the flood is going to happen again, what happened immediately after the flood, because Jesus encapsulates that with us, with one of the overarching signs, the end time oration in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 17, and 21. And that's the days of Noah.
Mhm.
And Genesis 29 uses the exact same words. They say the days of Noah was 600 years before the flood, 350 years after the flood. So both sides, and there's giants on both sides of the flood, and those days are coming back. And so we're going to see that legacy come back, and they're preparing us through the entertainment, through literature, through the education to accept these ancient things, even though we're told they're fairy tales right now.
Mhm.
And the fairy tale is a occult literature, and what it is that they you have this happy ever ending happy ever after ending in the fairy tales, and you have these great heroes and fairy queens and dragon kings, and the hero is going to live happily ever after. In reality, he probably died, but they call that a eucatastrophe, so the reader doesn't have to suffer through the pain of the hero dying. And they look at the Bible in the same way. So they look at the resurrection as a eucatastrophe. It's just an allegory that it didn't really happen. And they use an interpretive approach in their religion that they also apply to the Bible, and that true meaning is underneath, and only adepts understand what those actual meanings are.
That's super interesting. So, what are they trying to do at the very end? Are they trying to convince the world that God is evil? He's the bad guy. We need to come together and try to slay him?
Yeah, that's what they're going to tell us. They just don't quite take us to the full um, final chapter, so to speak. So, fallen angels created the giants to destroy humankind from the earth. And with after the resurrection that they didn't anticipate, they know that their time is sealed, but they're not telling that to their followers, the fallen angels, that we can't win at this point. So they want to destroy as many as they can. And in the end time, they're going to try and destroy the mundane from the earth, but they know they're probably going to destroy the whole earth, just as they did before.
So essentially,
And
what they're doing is misery loves company, right? They know their end is coming and they want to bring people with them.
well, it's based in the concept of Shiva that we talked about, and with the dance of Shiva with CERN and everything that goes along with that, and that technology that they're working on to sustain this, is that in the doctrine with Shiva is as a destroyer god. It is actually a good god because you have to have complete destruction to have the phoenix rise out of the ashes to start a renewed world. Now, in their game plan, humans die and their spirits go to heaven from a Christian perspective, and we're sleeping. But the giant's spirit, the counterfeit spirit, doesn't go to sleep. It's not designed to have a world that's going to be renewed that has any humans in it. It will be a world that they're going to provide the technology to provide that oiketerion for these disembodied spirits to live with amongst the fallen angels. So if you look at that movie Doctor Strange in their occult literature, it has a lot. You have this sort of science occult thing that's working in unison in multiple dimensions against the evil Lord of the universe, and the earth is this only place that the Dark Lord doesn't rule over, just as Satan has for a certain time in the fallen angels legal tender over the earth until the end time is completed. And that what they want to win is a treaty so that they can live apart from God. That's what they're selling. But what they're really selling is we want another world recreated, and we want to destroy this old world that has an association with humans, and only our offspring will dwell with us.
God, it's super interesting. Wow. So that's their end goal. They know where they're going. They know what's going to happen to them.
Yeah, and so whether or not it's in Doctor Strange or it's in any other sort of science fiction, and the introduction of aliens from other planets versus different dimensions, which is more likely where they come from, even from an alien mythos perspective, is that we're going to be saying that there is, like in Star Wars, a good force and an evil force, and you need to fight against the Darth Vaders of the world and this evil force that they follow. And to do that, you're going to have to join the galactic table and form a world government and our belief systems so that you can fight with us against the God of the Bible and his angels. And by the way, you have to kill off all of the monotheists as well. And that's literally what happens in the end time. You've got the tribulations and the persecutions. You've got the Antichrist that's coming, who's going to rule over the world. So people worship these fallen angels. You have war in heaven, and you have Antichrist actually going into the heavenly realm where God is. And he's going to, in Daniel 8:10, and throw down some of the starry host and trample on them. And they're going to be trying to be demonstrating that you can win this battle. But at the end, Jesus has to step in, or all flesh would be destroyed. Because that's their goal.
Wow. So I made a video a couple months ago called The Last War, and I talk about that very topic of the last war on earth basically happening. And at the end of Revelation, there's something called the Camp of the Saints. It's where all the saints from Enoch, Moses, are with Jesus in New Jerusalem, basically, right? The floating city. And
Yep.
in media,
Yep.
we're told about alien invasions, right? Like a big mothership coming to the earth, and then we all get together and we fight this mothership, right?
Yep.
Now, going back to Marvel, Avengers Endgame, where you have the character Thanos. Some people think that Thanos is a representation of the God of the Bible, right? Because he calls himself I am. But on top of that, his ship, his mothership,
Yep.
is called Sanctuary. New Jerusalem, on the inside, there is Zion, and that's also called the Sanctuary. So there's this idea or this theory I kind of came up with that when New Jerusalem appears, the world is going to be convinced that this is an alien mothership sent to destroy the earth. Let's all come together, kind of like what Reagan said in the 80s. Maybe if some kind of outer threat came to the world, we
Yep.
would all settle our differences,
Yep.
come together, and fight it.
Yeah. Yeah. And all of their literature that they put out in entertainment, whether it's Star Trek or Babylon 5, or the
Mhm.
world all comes together when we find out we're not alone in the universe, and then we have to fight for our freedom and blah 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 blah. It's the
Yeah.
standard sort of theory, and they're preparing people very, very well for that. So yeah, we want to be aware that there's going to be incredible deceptions that are coming along. You touched on Marvel Comics. And one of the things that the occult does is they like to advertise in plain sight and do all sorts of allegories and imagery. So Marvel comes from a description of giants in the book of Enoch, second book of Enoch, as I called, where they're called the marvelous ones.
Mm, that's interesting.
So yeah, everything that they do is based on that old um, history and belief system, and all things that they're trying to bring back. I mean, they're trying to bring back the giants. You know, if you look at the end time in terms of what's going to happen, you can look at World War II as a direct analogy. You have an Antichrist figure, you have the Aryan Reich Church,
Mhm.
polytheist religion that's like the Babylon of the end time. You've got a persecution of the Jewish people that will be extended to Christians and anybody who disagrees with them in the end time. You have the Third Reich, which is 1,000-year reign that he's trying to bring in. He's receiving technology from through the adepts of the secret societies, and you know, like the Thule Society, for example, or the Thule Society is it's
Mm,
also pronounced in English, which is you know, the Great White Brotherhood, the Celestial Mafia, spiritual guides, providing technology that is well advanced their capability. You know, whether it
mm,
was the tanks that are Panzer tanks, Tiger tanks that this model still used today, the jet engine, the rocket engine, this bell-shaped thing, which was thought to be interdimensional travel technology that they were working on. And they said that this came from these spiritual guides
it
that
did, yeah.
they communicated with. So,
I
yeah,
I believe I read about one of his advisors, I forgot his name, but he was in charge of the occult and he would perform seances, right? And they would get all
yep,
this knowledge and wisdom and instruction on how to
yep.
make these technologies. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, they had a number of secret societies that formed uh, the sort of organizational structure to bring about National Socialism, left-wing politics. For most
Mhm.
people don't realize it's not right-wing; it's National Social Party
Yeah.
of the workers, National Socialism of the Workers' Party is how it came out. And those were that meshed with Theosophy, which
Mhm.
was a branch out of Gnosticism, and they morphed that into a real and Grail ideology slant to it that they called Ariosophy, which was the Rice Church that they performed. So secret societies and the religious level, where the adepts are in communication, just as the Rosicrucians are with all of these spirit beings, is where they receive their knowledge from.
So that's from Madame Blavatsky, right? Theosophy. That's her religion she created.
Yes, yes, and she was essentially kind of Rosicrucian. She was much into the Egyptian um, bloodlines and religion, and she created Theosophy, at the beckoning of the hierarchy that goes higher up than the Rosicrucians,
Mm.
to create a religion in preparation for the end time that would merge back with where it came from, of the sciences, the seven sacred sciences, so that you would have unification of science and religion in the end time.
That's interesting. So, final question. Why do you think seminary schools and a lot of churches in America or just worldwide don't talk about Genesis 6 or completely dismiss it? They're like, it's not that important. Let's move on.
Well, they're told not to. I mean, they used to teach it till about a couple of hundred years ago, and it used to come down into the churches, but it's designed to prepare Christians for deception.
Mm.
So if we don't understand that nothing is new, we don't understand where we came from and that we were created as a resolution to the angelic rebellion, and you're trying to deceive us, you need to take away that information. So the ministers and the priests are not taught prehistory or prophecy. And in most churches, not all, but 99% of them, you can actually get told to leave your church if you're pressing your questions on prehistory or prophecy. And if we are in the fig tree generation, and I think we might be, I think we are, then at the time when we need the leaders of the flocks the most, they're going to fail most of Christianity. So what I try and do is I try and get people to look deeper into the Bible to understand where we're headed. And we can't imagine all the horrible things that are coming.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
But it's going to be horrible, and we're going to see things that we just, even I, and I'm deeply sort of learned in this, that I can't imagine the power that they're going to bring to bear, and the deceptions that they're going to bring to bear, and the catastrophes is going to be just unimaginable.
Yeah. Well, that's what the Bible says. It says it's if possible, it can deceive the very elect, right? Those who follow the Messiah, the Bible.
Yes.
So that's interesting.
Yeah. And so much so that all of that will put Christians in a position where they're likely to choose, by implication there, Antichrist as the Messiah. The
Mm.
good thing is we're told that we're going to be saved as Christians from that hour of trial, and also from the wrath. And the wrath happens after the hour of trial. The hour of trial is the hour that the 10 kings in one like mind, one hive mind, hand over all of their power to Antichrist in Revelation 17. And it's the same hour that he's going to destroy Babylon at the midpoint of the last 7 years, which is recorded in Revelation 14 and in Revelation 18, same words, and the hour of trial. And this is the hour that we're looking for Jesus's return. And that's when he comes back for the rapture to save us from that trial. One thing about when you start to understand the chronology of prophecy and how not to be fooled in terms of doing things that most people do is, getting ahead of chronology and reinventing what scripture says or leaving out inconvenient passages. Once you figure out that there's a template that Jesus provided us, it becomes pretty easy.
Mm.
Still takes work to understand it, but
Yeah.
it becomes, everything fits.
Yeah, like the Bible says, I mean, the spirit of truth leads you to all truth if you let it, right?
Yeah, if you let it. And we're stubborn people. And I'm stubborn. I mean, I can't believe how many times I resist stuff. And if I just open myself up and say, okay, I will dig into that biblically, that the answers start to come and it starts to make sense.
Yeah, and that goes for everybody. If the truth stands, then none of us should be afraid of looking into topics outside of our little reality bubble, basically.
Yeah. So one of the things, I love science fiction. I love horror movies. I'm not saying not to read this type of entertainment. Just be aware of what they're messaging. Tolkien and Lewis, they were great storytellers. They were Gnostics. And I have documents on this for people, and a lot of Christians get a sort of a bubble popped when they read over the information I send them. But they were terrific writers, and their entertainment is fun. But if we're going to provide that to our children, then let's explain to our children this world that we live in and these figures that they're representing.
So they can recognize these patterns and not just mindlessly watch this content, because it all has a meaning and purpose.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Gary, thank you so much for doing this. I really do appreciate it. For those of you guys who want to check out Gary's book, the Genesis Conspiracy 1, or the Genesis 6 Conspiracy 1 and 2, the link for that will be in my bio. Gary, thank you so much. Really appreciate you doing this. And till next time.